the same time span of the macro analysis. We have two measures of wages. The first one is the current hourly wages, which is available for 7 countries. The second one is the labor income for the previous year that is available for most of the countries. Then we use as a check also these incomes in parity purchasing power, because of course in Europe you have important differences. And here is the set of coverages: experience, education, part-time, fixed term, that capture the institution side of the labor market, the reforms that took place in this period, the occupational task, abstract, routine, services and offshore, that I told you before, and the industry dummies. So what's about the unconditional polarization? So the wages that we observe in the labor market. What's going on over time? We have that the 90-10 increased both using hourly wages and gross yearly earnings. So inequality increased in Europe. And also using in parity purchasing power, it doesn't change, but you have anyway an increase in inequality. Consistently with polarization hypothesis, you have that the 90-50 is positive, so the skilled get far away from the medium skilled, but we have that the 50-10 is always positive. So we don't have evidence of polarization in the lower tail. It's not true that the unskilled get closer to the medium skilled. Actually, they get far away, especially if you consider the early earnings. You can see that all the 90-10 variation is due to the lower tail. Okay, so we have a monotone impact that we will see later on, as it was in the US, like in the 80s. Okay, I will show you later on. So we have no unconditional polarization, also with individual data. And now we have the last part. I hope you will resist another 10 minutes, 5 minutes. The last part is on the conditional polarization. So we want to check the impact of technology on the distribution of wages. So we want to identify the impact of each single covariate. So we want to know if the increase in inequality is due to some specific covariate, and for each covariate we want to know if it is due to the changes in the share of covariate, like the composition effect, like the share of graduates that increase, or by the returns of that covariate, like the return to education that increase. Now there are two different channels. Oops. Sorry. So we need some counterfactual distribution. There are many methods. I don't spend time on that. We use the last one that is based on the recentered influence function regression that are proposed by Filippo Forti-Lemier in an econometric paper of 2009. I just provide you the intuition because it's quite not very easy to present in 5 minutes. So our goal is to decompose the change over time of a distribution. In our case, wages. So we have two distributions in 2 moments of time. There is a change over time. We want to explain which variables this change is due. So using this Riff regression in the econometric paper, it's possible to compute some coefficients that are associated to the covariate, some quantile coefficients. Okay? So we can write the distribution of wages as a function of the x, the characteristics of the individuals, and on the beta, the returns of that characteristics. Okay? Once we have done it, so the observed fw is expressed as a function of x and b theta, we can compute counterfactual. So we can, this f depend on x and beta, so I can say, so I could derive a counterfactual with respect to x, to the characteristic, to the composition of the labor force. For instance, how inequality increase since the share of abstract jobs, for instance, increase. Okay, there is a share of abstract jobs that increase. I want to see which is the impact of this variable on the increase in inequality for each percentile, or the counterfactual with respect to beta, the return of the covariance. So how inequality increase since the return of having an abstract job, not the abstract job, the share of abstract jobs, but the returns of having an abstract job increase. So we can compute, for instance, we have the distribution of, which would be the distribution of 2007, if all the covariates were at the 95 period, all the coefficients were at the 95 period, except the one of abstract. So I can derive some counterfactual that provide us the impact of each covariate, the composition impact and the coefficient on wage structure impact. I hope the intuition is clear. I understand that it's not very simple. And I can isolate the impact of each covariate. And so I investigate the change over time of the wage weight distribution in the period 95-2007. So the black line is what we observe in the data. As I told you before, it's like a monotonic trend, as in the US in the 80s. Those who are at the top increase the most, then those who are in the middle, then those who are at the bottom. Here we
what is on the y-axis?
The y is the change of wages, of log wages over time. Okay, so you have that those who are at the top, their wages remain basically constant, while those who are in the middle increase a little bit, and those who are at the top increase the most. So as I showed you before, the 90-50 increase and the 50-10 increase. Okay, and then I can derive the counterfactual. Here, for instance, the counterfactual for composition. What this curve tells us is keeping constant the distribution of the return, so the coefficient, which would be the distribution of wages, only changing the composition, the X, the share of graduates, male, female, experience, and so on. We see that there are just changes coverage, there is not much difference. It's quite flat, so there is not an impact on the distribution. While all the change in the observed trend is driven by the coefficient. No? Keeping constant the X only changes changing the coefficient. We can see that we explain basically all the trend in the distribution. Okay? Here we are not decomposing the impact of technology or education, they are all together in composition and wage structure. We want to isolate the components because we are really interested in technology, in the presentation, and then of course in the other components, education, in the paper they are explained. Here we have the composition effect for each component, they are almost flat, so I don't spend time on that. While here we have the coefficient effect, the wage structure effect, that is the most important, no? the one that drives all the observed trend that we have in the European labor market. And we can see that even if a mild one, we have a polarizing impact of technology. The green line is the technology curve that is the sum of services, routine, and abstract, these three variables. Is a little, especially in the lower tail, is polarizing in the sense that this curve is telling us keeping constant the distribution of covariates, keeping constant the distribution of the beta or all other variables, how the distribution of wages would change only if technology parameters change. Okay, it's identifying just the impact of the parameter of technology. And you can see that the parameter of technology favor the most the unskilled labor, and while here there is a slightly increasing trend, but very mild. So you have most of the impact in the lower part.
What are the technology parameters and what is on the x-axis?
So on the x you have still the change in wages. Yeah. In the horizontal you have the percentile, and then the green line is keeping constant, which would be the counterfactual distribution of wages if the x were constant over time and the other coefficient as well were constant over time. So the impact just due to the technology. And it is the sum, now we're going to split it, it's the sum of abstract, routine, and services. Okay? Now, in the next slide, I show you, which is, I think, the most important of this part. So, this U-shaped impact can be decomposed into 3 variables, I told you. And interestingly, you have that abstract has an impact on the upper tail of the distribution. This is clear, no? If you have a conjugate job, it pays the most in this part of the distribution is increasing, okay? While services is decreasing. So having service jobs defined as defined in the paper favor the most those who are unskilled. As in the US, there is paper by Autor and Dorn in the American Economic Review just published. They show that the driving force in the lower tail is the service sector, this service intensity. Okay? Okay. And then we finish. We have in the service sector, we have even more pronounced this effect. And for the sample of yearly gross earning, we have a very similar impact. I don't show you the figures, the graphs, they are very similar. And what we have here that is interesting is the role of institutions. We have that when we consider the yearly income, before we had hourly wages. So there, fixed term and part-time does not matter. When we consider the yearly income, we find out that actually the increase in the 90s and 2000 of fixed term contract and part-time, so the increase in flexibility has penalized especially the workers at the bottom of the distribution, quite consistently, like 50%. So we have an impact of institution that is very important when you consider the yearly wages. And it's not surprising, no? Hourly wages, they are not, the empirical literature shows that there are some differences, like 10% of differences, but not very much. The difference come out along the whole year. And we have also the education, a reducing impact. And this is interesting because it is accord with the US case in which education is a driver of the increasing inequality. In Europe seems to be the opposite. I conclude, and yes, so we have our result shows that actually in Europe we don't, according to our result, there is no this strong evidence of wage polarization at all. We should say that maybe it's the opposite. We have a very mild or very no evidence of wage polarization. So we can say that unconditional wage polarization does not occur never with both aggregate and individual data. If we observe wages in the labor market, they do not get polarized. And this is consistent with other paper for Europe for inequality, showing that the institutions in Europe are different and play a role in reducing the impact of labor forces, in technological forces. And for conditional wage polarization, as I told you before, with aggregate data there is no polarization of wages, just polarization of hours, and using microdata there is just a mild evidence of wage polarization, especially in the lower tail. And in the lower tail it is due to services, as in the author paper, while in the upper tail is due to abstract. And this is consistent with what we were expecting. Even if this evidence is quite mild in a sense, there is few changes. So I hope I've been clear in the presentation, and if there are questions.
Yeah, I have a question, Paolo. It was a very nice presentation, an interesting paper. As I sat here listening to it, I said to myself, okay, I mean, this is, in the end, this is a, what should we say, a production story. So you start out with aggregate production and you say, okay, so we experienced this technological shock. Somehow technological process becomes different from what it was before, and then you build on the model and look at the implications of that by looking at correlates. So I was just thinking, okay, so if this is a production story, then what is the production function where you say, okay, well, we get some changes in technological progress, And this is going to change wage bill shares.
But why just a production story? It's more
Well,
supply and demand that plays.
Why? No, I mean, come on. I mean,
Especially in the micro part, you have.
well, but you started with the macro part. You told
Yeah,
the story.
okay. So
You
let's
told
focus on the
economic
macro.
story in
Yeah,
the US.
there could be more production function and use formula.
Yeah.
Production
So what's
function.
the production function where what you say happens changes wage bill shares? Can you write it down?
But there are an aggregate production function augmented with some proxy of technology, like the paper of Verlinen, a simple production function with.
A simple production function, I'd say Cobb-Douglas production function?
I think in the paper of Verlinen they have a simple production. In there also with some technological variable, and then when you go to the FOC, you have the first order condition. You can have a reduction, a reduced form, which you have capital labor, and so like innovation variables.
Yeah, but I mean, come on, with the Cobb-Douglas production function.
And you could do it. I think you could do it like CIS. I think it's.
Oh, wait. Okay, and with Cobb-Douglas, what do we teach students in beginning microeconomics? Factor shares are constant.
Yeah.
You can kick it around, you can torture it, but factor shares remain constant in the Cobb-Douglas production function. Okay? So, I'm sitting here thinking, no, Paolo probably doesn't have a Cobb-Douglas production function in mind. Now, you wave the CES at me, okay? Think of this. What do we teach about the CES production function? If you have either, well, I mean, usually we do it with capital and labor, but we can have different skill labor, and that's okay. But if we have biased technological progress in the CES production function, right, then its effect on factor shares depends on the elasticity of substitution, right?
Yeah.
The elasticity of substitution is greater than 1, share goes up, if it's less than 1, it goes down. Okay. All right. So then, if I'm to believe your story, that it's a CES production function and we had skill-biased technological progress, what is the implication for the elasticity of substitutions? And do we want to believe it?
So I could easily apply like a Katz-Murphy framework to estimate the elasticity of substitution based on a CIS production function. I did it for Italy, it's greater than 1. I didn't do it for Europe. It might be an interesting extension.
So for Italy, it's greater than 1?
In Italy, it's much greater than 1.
I won't believe it.
No,
Where?
it's
Don't
fine.
believe
In
it.
Germany, it's like 5.
I don't believe it.
No, don't say you don't believe it, because you don't know what we're substituting.
Yeah,
So this is the elasticity of substitution between what?
Between skilled and unskilled.
So you have a production function where output depends on skilled workers and unskilled workers and nothing
Yeah,
else?
in that case, yes. I did it in
Doesn't
that,
depend on
yeah,
capital?
in that case, you can add capital, like in the Russell model, for instance. You have 2,000.
Oh, then you're right, we don't believe that. Yeah. Okay.
Not even the one with capital.
No,
So
I mean,
what's your point? I don't understand what you're
I mean, you're telling a production function story that motivates your entire paper. It tells us what the correlates should be, and we never see the production function. I mean, you just say, hey, believe me, I've got a production function, and if there's skill-biased technological progress, I expect it to do this, this, and this. And I'm saying, okay, come on, this guy's heavy duty, he's got big theory here, at least he ought to be able to write down the production function and show that this thing happens. And I don't see it.
Yeah, you're right. I should add some, at least part on that, yeah.
Let me disagree with you though. Since I don't believe a word of production function, either it says or not. This is a way of letting the data talk and say,
of course.
Is there an indirect evidence of labor demand, different labor demand conditional on different skills? Whether this is evidence of a skill bias or not is another matter. Skill bias is another Pink Panther, I think. But
yeah, I can reply. I think you are right. I could have presented but I think it shouldn't be very. Now I will spend time on that, but it shouldn't be. It should be very easy. There are many papers, and I don't remember now. Just production function to reduce formats. I don't know. It doesn't seem to be really a point here. And then I agree. In a moment to finish. I agree with Professor Dosi that. Causality in our model is more an empirical fact, in the sense that then we have an IV strategy and we try to relate to find out, even if IV approaches are always debatable, you try to find out their correlation, a causality, not just a correlation.
Okay, well,
I think
I'll try to
anyway, you are right
Professor
that
Dossi on how to do economics.
you are right.
My
that,
point is that your correlates. He says, oh, yes, good, we're looking at the correlates. What does the data tell us? But you select the data based on the fundamental model, which is a production model. And if you don't have the production model, then those correlates, they may correlate, but they may be totally irrelevant.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Okay. So, we've made progress.
Okay, thanks anyway.
In your model, would the migration play a role in explaining the wage distribution, especially for the low skills?
Yeah, unfortunately in the micro part we don't have a reliable information for a CHP. For the European Community Household Panel, the share of immigrants is very close to zero, it's not reliable. So we cannot, in the micro part, we cannot investigate this issue. We have this variable, immigrants, because there are many papers showing that the boom of services is also driven by immigration rates and so on, no? The lower part of the distribution. So we wanted to introduce a variable for immigration. But we couldn't, because just in the EUSILC it's quite reliable, while in CHP
when
it's
you
not.
analyze the composition issue, you take care,
I think it should matter.
You consider demographic.
Yeah, demographic, yes. Demographic without considering foreigners, immigrants. Yeah, demographics, and we show that demographic matter, especially for those who are in the middle of the distribution. But it would have been interesting to have immigration, because there are like some paper of Peri and other people of the Bank of Italy that show that matters in the lower table.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? If not, I think we should thank Paolo for his presentation. And I would like also to thank you all for participating. So now we can close this.
Everybody's free.
Yes.